Okay, we're going to begin our presentation. I'd like to welcome everybody to our new webinar, The Interaction of Processes and Its Importance to a Successful Audit. My name is Joseph Krolikowski. I'm the Technical Director of Perry Johnson, and I'm excited to present you with this new webinar. I do hope that everyone finds this to be beneficial. Couple of technical notes. Everyone in our call today is on mute. I would ask that if you have questions, that you utilize the question portion of the dashboard. We'll absolutely make time for your questions and try to help you. Our topics for today, we're going to begin with some background on why this is such a big deal. We're going to review requirements that are laid out in both the 2008 and 2015 versions of ISO 9001. We're going to examine what is a process, and we're also going to examine what is not a process and try to draw some comparisons and some strategies on understanding the difference. And ultimately, we're going to try to share with you some strategies for meeting this requirement and how to do so with minimal changes to your existing documentation. Now, back in 2014, PJR was faced with a mandate. We were given a mandate by our accreditation bodies. We were told that we were not being strict enough in assessing client interaction of processes, or IOPs. And we were held accountable in particular to a requirement from ISO 17021 that reads as follows. An audit program for the full certification cycle shall be developed to clearly identify the audit activity or activities required to demonstrate that the client's management system fulfills the requirements for certification. And it's that bit about client's management system that we had so much trouble with. We were told you need to make sure that your auditors are documenting their audits in such a way that they reflect the client's management system, as opposed to the auditor's interpretation of what the client's management system is. So based on that, our policy in 2014 became we have to adhere to the interaction of processes, and only the interaction of processes. Now this extends to the audit report, obviously, but it also extends to the auditor's notes, the audit plan, the any nonconformances that are written. So it touches in a number of places where we have to have this alignment. And where this becomes difficult is if what we are given as the interaction of processes doesn't really do an effective job of identifying the processes, the auditor's job and PJR's job in documenting the audit becomes really difficult. And accordingly, we instructed our auditors that if you encounter an IOP that doesn't appropriately identify the processes, you need to start issuing a nonconformance. And so you might say to yourself, well, where does the standard say that you have to do that? So in the current standard, excuse me, in the current standard, 9001-2008, there's a number of clauses that are pointed to as a mandate for this requirement, and I've included the three most critical here. In 4.1a, it says that the organization shall determine the processes that are needed for the quality management system and their application throughout the organization. Now, in the second clause, it says the organization shall determine the sequence and interaction of these processes. And then additionally, in 4.2.2c, it states that the organization shall establish and maintain a quality manual that includes a description of the interaction between the processes of the quality management system. Now, as I'm sure you're well aware, there's no longer a requirement for a quality manual in ISO 9001-2015. However, there are still requirements that mandate an identification of processes, and those are as follows. First, in 4.4.1, in the leading paragraph, it says that the organization shall determine the processes needed for the quality management system. It goes on to say you shall determine the sequence and interaction of these processes. And then in 4.4.2, it states that the organization shall maintain documented information. Now that's the new way of saying you need to document it. It needs to be stated officially on paper. You need to maintain documented information to support the operation of its processes. And part of the way that that clause is being interpreted, has been instructed to be interpreted, is you need to identify in a documented fashion what your processes are and how they interact. So in terms of what is a process, let's dig into the 9000 document. This is the fundamentals and vocabulary, and we'll start with the official definition for process. It states, a process is a set of interrelated or interacting activities that use inputs to deliver an intended result. Excuse me for the typo. That use inputs to deliver an intended result. And the key portion of this is where it says interrelated or interacting activities. And this helps identify a key part of what a process is not. A process is not intended to be a single step. It's a set of activities, a set of steps focused on a shared goal, as opposed to one piece of a process. Now, in terms of what we think of in typical process designations, now of course this is going to vary from company to company, but in our experience of auditing numerous companies, there tend to be some parallels. So what are some things that we typically see as process designation? Sales, marketing, purchasing, production, shipping, design and development, production control. Now obviously the way that you choose to identify your processes, the way that you choose to designate your processes is completely up to you. But I'm sure that you can recognize that each of these bulleted items is not a single step. This is a series of steps with a shared goal. If we think about purchasing, for example, what are the inputs to purchasing? We might have identified need for purchasing from different departments. We might have a report that's run that tells us what we need to issue an order for. Then the purchasing agents issue actual purchase orders and go through the process of evaluating suppliers. All of that is occurring under a single process designation, purchasing. We can draw similar parallels here for other named items. So the naming of the processes is absolutely still your responsibility as the organization. It's up to you what your processes are, but remember that they are more than just single steps within the system. It's a collection of interrelated activities. Now, for example, if you understand your system to be made up of 4 processes, and this is one that we get fairly often: sales, purchasing, production, support. It's absolutely acceptable for your IOP to reflect as much, and we do get IOPs that look that way. Now, in terms of what is not a process, I think I've already made most of my point here, but let's take a deeper look at this. The IOP documents that get rejected most often are those that present steps within a single process. Now, so what are some examples of that? Create work order, issue production schedule, complete work order, package product, ship product. Now, In this example, it's conceivable that all 5 of these might be part of a single process, but they are not processes by themselves. An interaction of process document that bears these types of items as processes should result in a nonconformance being issued during the audit. Now, in terms of what you can do to work with your current documentation, I know for many of you, a lot of thought and consideration went into the development of your IOP, and we're also well aware that for a lot of our clients, it's a little disconcerting to be told that something that passed audit assessment for many years is now suddenly unacceptable. So for a lot of you, our feeling is that with a few tweaks, you can keep what you have and utilize it in a more effective way. So let's walk through an example of how this might work. We're going to review an example of a sample interaction of processes document. Now please note that this example is not reflective of any particular PJR client, and it was created solely for the purpose of this presentation. So here's the raw interaction of processes, and we have some steps called out here. Customer order received, order entered into mainframe, sales and work orders issued. Here we have an assessment for need of raw materials, purchase order issued to supplier, purchased items received, prioritize work orders at the production meeting. Then we have some production steps here: stamping, grinding, cleanup, assembly, inspection of products prior to shipment, shipment, and then rejected product disposition meetings. Now there's a lot here, obviously, and I'm sure that you can kind of imagine the company that this document was written for. But with only a few exceptions, none of these truly are processes in and of themselves. Now, the first improvement that we can look at here, let's ask ourselves, where are the support processes? Now, this is one of the things that happens when we have an IOP that's turned into us. We don't see support processes being identified. Now, one thing I want to point out, in ISO 9000 and in 9001, there is no particular distinction that's drawn in terms of classifying your processes. You don't have to say that a support process versus a core process. However, it is still a rather common thing that companies do to have core processes and support processes. So what happens is, because the support processes are viewed as less important, they end up getting left off of the IOP. So what are we talking about when we talk about support processes? This could be management review, internal auditing, training, corrective action, management meetings, production meetings, things of this nature. So let's apply that to our test model. How might we do that? Okay, here is the same map that we were just looking at, but now you'll note that it has a box for support processes: management review, internal audit, corrective action, training, document records control, and we have some unconnected arrows here. And the obvious intent is that these support processes support the entirety of what's happening here. These are all done in support of what we might call the core or key processes. Now, additionally, what we've seen as a strategy for what to do with an existing IOP is to create a key. And the key then identifies what are the processes. Now, this is done in a number of ways. You might see it done through numbering or alpha characters. What this does is it enables the IOP to stay as is, but it serves the quality system and it serves the audit process by naming the processes. that are made up by these steps. So let's add this improvement to our IOP as well. Now, for purposes of the presentation here, I went with color coding. So now we have orange, which we would take as indicative of sales order entry. We have green for purchasing, yellow for production, purple for shipping, which shipping is by itself anyhow, red for quality, and blue for support. So we now have 6 named processes, and we have a way of designating what are the pieces of those processes. As you can see, we've kept the content of the IOP as it was before, but we've accomplished 2 key things. We've now identified what are the processes, and we've added a measure so that we know what the support processes are. This is an IOP that will pass audit assessment. Now, it's important for you to know that there's a lot of ways that this requirement can be fulfilled. I don't want you to presume that the preceding example represents anything mandatory or expected. We have seen a number of methods on how to do this over the years. We've accepted a number of approaches. So we'd like to share with you some additional ways that this has been done and give you some additional food for thought. Now, I'll quickly mention that this IOP, or excuse me, this presentation that we're doing is going to be available for download shortly after it's complete. So you can download this, pause the slides, and have a look at what we've presented here to try to develop some strategies. Okay, here's our first example. Now these folks over here on the right-hand side, they've called out what their processes are. There are 7 of them. And over here on the left, we have a box for support processes. And again, they've called out some different items. I think the intent here is that these processes all kind of flow in a linear fashion: sell the product, purchase what you need, design the product, schedule production, carry out production, final quality, and then ship. Here's another example that we have seen in the past. In this instance, the idea is that this management-related box, this is all of your support processes, and this kind of mutually supports this singular flow of activity: quoting, work order receiving, overhaul, inventory management, shipping, and then quality also kind of impacting each of these steps in an equal fashion. This particular approach over here, this one is called swim lane. We have 4 named processes: support, production, purchasing, sales. And we have some identified steps within these processes. And we can see the process connections. Again, the idea that the support processes are here to support the larger system. The sales process flowing down to production, purchasing, supporting the ability to issue work orders, but also as an input to the production process, and so forth. Here's another. In this instance, the highlighted boxes are considered core, and everything else kind of around it that isn't highlighted is considered support. And again, you can see the typical designations. And you'll note, here they don't call it production. They call it distribution, service exchange, repair and return. These are the processes as the organization understands them. And again, that's a very important point that I want to make today. These are your processes for you to name as you see fit. So in conclusion, I want to ensure that we've when we do an audit for you, PJR wants it to be value added. We certainly don't want to get hung up on the technicality, but it is something that we have been instructed to look at and to look at closely. So we are hoping that you'll use the points of this presentation to develop an even better understanding of what we mean by an interaction of processes and what our expectations are in the identification of your processes. Okay, that concludes my presentation. I'm going to go ahead and open up the question panel if anybody has any questions. As I mentioned, the presentation will be available for reviewing in just a short time after we're finished here. Are there any questions? Okay. Oh, okay. Brandy Welvert, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, how does this affect internal audits? Well, Brandy, the expectation in Clause 8.2.2 of ISO 9001-2008 is that you will conduct audits against your processes within your internal audit process. And so we require as much as possible that the internal audits are assessments of your processes. So if you have an IOP that's been drawn up to reflect your processes and it's appropriate, our hope and expectation is that the internal audits will make use of that as well. Obviously, there's a number of ways to approach the internal audit process. As long as the internal audit is an assessment of your processes, it should be acceptable. Okay, Bill Peterson asks, where does customer satisfaction fit in? Well, Bill, in terms of customer satisfaction, it is, this is another item that is viewed as, it's typically viewed as a support process, and it's certainly appropriate to identify it as such. But I would say to you that if the assessment of customer satisfaction fits into one of your other existing processes, then it's okay to identify it as such. For example, if you have a process that you call marketing, or if you have a process that you call feedback, however you wish to approach it. Again, tell us what your processes are and show us how your processes together address the requirements of the standard. Dan Costellas asks, can we get the PowerPoint presentation? We will absolutely make the slides available to you. Randy Robbins asks, should outsourced processes be included on the interaction of processes? Yes, absolutely. If you are outsourcing an aspect of your quality system, 17021 requires that be called out on the IOP, and anybody that's been through a Stage 1 audit knows that is assessed. Tony Raposo asks, what about metrics associated with outputs of the processes? Great question. Tony, the identifying of metrics as it pertains to your processes, that is required, of course. You do have to have a way to measure the effectiveness of your processes. It does not necessarily have to be listed right on the IOP itself. If you have a half dozen or so named processes, as long as you have documented in some fashion what the metrics are for those processes, that's completely acceptable. Walter Teague asks, is it a good idea to insert procedure numbers in IOP blocks? Walter, I would say that it's certainly one way to correlate procedures with processes. It's not something that you have to do, but I could certainly see that it would help a user of the IOP to be able to correlate what procedures are associated with which processes. Cheryl Larson asks, is there an expectation on how often internal audits are completed and documented? Cheryl, generally the frequency of internal audits is dictated by the effectiveness of those internal audits. There is no official mandate, but generally we look to see that they're being done at an appropriate frequency to support your quality system. For most companies, that means that they're done a minimum of once annually. Charles Tuazolo asks, on one audit I was told that the IOP needs to look like the 0.2 diagram. Charles, I'm going to presume that you're referring to the diagram within ISO 9001, the circular diagram. Please comment. Charles, if you are in that situation again in the future, I invite you to contact us here at Perry Johnson headquarters. And actually, I will mention that for the group at large. If you have an interaction of processes document that you feel is completely acceptable as written, and your auditor is telling you that it is not acceptable, you absolutely have the right to contact us here at headquarters. We will review your case and we will render a binding decision on the acceptability of the IOP. Becky Sue asks, will there be a conflict with ISO TS 16949 with regard to system implementation and auditing? Becky, I don't completely understand your question, but what I will say is, in terms of identifying the processes, the requirement between TS 16949 and ISO 9001 is essentially the same. There are some mandatory processes within TS 16949, of course, things like what's commonly referred to as APQP, PPAP, and so forth. But generally, the expectation is the same. Now, of course, TS 16949 also has a requirement that you identify what are your support processes, your management processes, your customer-oriented processes, and so forth. We can discuss that offline if need be. John Chow asks, are corrective and preventive actions included in processes? Well, corrective and preventive action, those are both mandatory activities within a quality system, mandated by 852 and 853. You do have to work those into the fabric of your quality system. Now, whether you choose to identify those as standalone processes or incorporate them into a larger management overview or support process, that's entirely up to you. Branko Lobo asks, would you accept a classification in key strategic and support processes being strategic processes, for example, management review? Branko, I would say that that sounds potentially acceptable, sight unseen. I would have to review it to give you a final decision. Okay. Heidi Jones asks, must the IOP be a centralized document, or can it be documented in individual SOPs? I think, Heidi, you're asking, do you have to have a centralized IOP? To meet the requirements of 4.2.2c under ISO 9001, you do have to have something within your quality manual that identifies what the processes are and how they interact. Now, I will say that under 9001-2015, that requirement is no longer there in terms of it having to be within a quality manual. However, our expectation would still be that you know what your processes are and how they interact. Now, if that is something that can be accomplished within the SOPs themselves, I'd have to look at it, but I will not say that it is unacceptable out of hand. Okay, Anna Gomez asked, where does the external process should be established as support process? I think you're referring to outsourced processes, Anna, and again, if you want to designate that as a support process, that's fine. Some companies find that it's appropriate to align outsourced processes with their purchasing activity, as typically purchasing is responsible for coordination of such activity. Okay. Tara Brown asks, how do you deal with apparent conflicts of interest in an internal audit, or is there a certain acceptable level of conflict of interest since it is in fact internal? Well, Tara, in terms of looking at conflict of interest and objectivity of auditing, which is of course very important regardless of the type of audit, as long as I can see that the person is not auditing their own work and there is no level of maliciousness within the audit and the audit is overall effective, I think I'm able to comfortably conclude that there is no conflict of interest. Okay. Miguel Juarez asks, if a process is identified as a main process, we could audit more than the others' processes. Again, the emphasis is on the emphasis here is on not auditing your own work. So if that can be shown, I think the name of the process is certainly important, but you can show within the audit notes, within the audit findings and so forth, that this person did not audit their own work. Okay. And Charles gives us a thanks. You're quite welcome. My pleasure. Okay. Okay. Michelle Cochran asks, we share a quality system with our sister company, but some of the processes, such as customer service and sales, are not covered at our facility. Does our IOP need to include customer service and sales if they are not performed on site but are performed at sister company? Michelle, those sound like outsourced processes to me, and the intent is that, yes, they would be called out on the IOP in some fashion. There's a lot of ways that that can be done. Okay. Andy Olson asks, can you identify processes as clauses from the standard? This is in reference to Figure 1 on page 5 from AS 9120A. Andy, you'll beg my pardon. I'm not intimately familiar with AS 9120A, so I would ask that you direct your question to a member of our Aerospace Executive Committee. If you want to contact us here at headquarters, we can get your question answered in an appropriate fashion. I do apologize that I cannot answer it myself. Okay, lots of great questions today. Any others? I went from a blank screen to all kinds of questions. You guys have a lot of good ones today. Anything further? Okay. Okay, well, I'll just mention in closing, we're going to be having another webinar tomorrow on preparing for the transition audit. This presentation will be repeated next month. Charles asks, will I do more of these? I'm going to do as many of these webinars as I possibly can. I like doing them, and I certainly like trying to help our clients. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we want to be sure that you feel that you're getting the very best that you can from your registrar. Okay. Okay, Anna Gomez asks, what about quality plans presentation? I'll say that's a possible for the future. Okay, have a wonderful holiday season, everybody, and take care. Thank you.